Good morning, everybody, or good evening if you are in Asia. This webinar is on education, conscience, and tax justice, reflecting on the case of Tai Ji Men in Taiwan. And we have two focuses today. The first focus is World Day of Education, and the second focuses the introduction of a new book called Who Stole Their Youth. So since it's World Day of Education, we will start with a video message from the Secretary General of the United Nations.
When education is interrupted, it affects everyone, and especially students, teachers, and families. Today, on the third International Day of Education, I pay tribute to their resilience in the face of a pandemic that, at its peak, forced almost every school, institute, and university to close its doors. Although this disruption has led to learning innovations, it has also dashed hopes of a brighter future among vulnerable populations. All of us pay the price. After all, education is the foundation for expanding opportunities, transforming economies, fighting intolerance, protecting our planet, and achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. As the world continues to battle the pandemic, education, as a fundamental right and a global public good, must be protected to avert a generational catastrophe. Even before the pandemic, some 258 million children and adolescents were out of school, the majority of them girls. And more than half of 10-year-olds in low and middle-income countries were not learning to read a simple text. In 2021, we must seize all opportunities to turn this situation around. We must ensure the full replenishment of the Global Partnership for Education Fund and strengthen global education cooperation. We must also step up our efforts to reimagine education, training teachers, bridging the digital divide, and rethinking curricula to equip learners with the skills and knowledge to flourish in our rapidly changing world. Let us commit to promote education for all, today and every day.
So this was the Secretary General of the United Nations, and I believe our two themes, the World Day of Education and the introduction of the new book, are closely connected. This week, there was an important conference in Warsaw, Poland, of course, through the web, sponsored by the UNESCO on global education. And there were 6 speakers who talked about the Tai Ji Men case in Taiwan, and the case became a main topic in the questions and answer session and discussion. Why? What is the connection? I believe that what we see in the world is a rising, growing presence of alternative forms of education. Tai Ji Men is a menpai, something similar to a school, although it's more than a school, but it is a facility, an organization providing a sort of alternative education, which is at the same time a spiritual education, an education for the body, an education for the mind, an education to morality based on conscience. And what happened in 1996 is something that happened elsewhere, that in times of retrenchment or growing authoritarianism, the governments do not like alternative projects of education. They want to educate their citizens. They don't want private alternative projects of global education to flourish. And this is the background of the persecution of some religious movements for political reasons in 1996 in Taiwan, which also involved Tai Ji Men, although they, in reality, they had not taken a political position in the 1996
Okay.
So what about the book? Who stole their youth? This book is very important, and I'm very glad it will be soon published in English. It's already published in Mandarin, Chinese. And this book does three different important things. Number one, it revisits once again the history of the Tai Ji Men persecution through the voices of the persons involved. And I have read a lot about the Tai Ji Men case, even I have written a lot about the Tai Ji Men case, but there is always something new, some new angle, some fresh angle, some legal details we may have missed. And that's why this book is useful. It provides new details. But second, this book concludes the whole chapter with a practical guide for citizens. What to do when the government is after you, when the tax office is after you, when you believe you suffer injustice. And there is a very practical advice for Taiwanese citizens, which to some extent is valid for all citizens throughout the world. But I believe the most important part is the third part, encapsulated in the title. Who stole their youth? So for some devotees called Dizi of Tai Ji Men, 1996 and the following years really told tales of a stolen youth. They had terrible experience. They were young people, their parents were arrested, the media were against them with strange and false accusations, such as the movement was dabbling in black magic and praising goblins. And so they were bullied at school. They saw their parents, in some cases, die prematurely because of the persecution. Some of them decided to move abroad from Taiwan and never return. So this is a stolen youth. But then there is another youth, of those who were children in 1996, and being part of Tai Ji Men, they may have looked forward to tour the world with the beautiful Tai Ji Men cultural shows about traditional Chinese culture, bringing a message of peace and love, spending time in learning martial arts and self-cultivation. And they did all this. But they also had to spend considerable time in protesting the tax persecution. So many young people became teenagers, young adults, spending a significant part of their time in the streets, fighting against persecution and fighting for tax justice. But in conclusion of this short introduction to the book that I hope most of those listening to us today will be able to read soon, I would argue of some of the legal scholars who wrote the introduction to the book also argued that their youth was not entirely stolen, was not wasted, because these young people, in a very hard way, learned a very important lesson, that we as citizens in democratic countries, we should learn to protect ourselves. That the democratic states, not to mention totalitarian states, are not always benevolent. And we should learn to fight for our rights. We should not assume that others will fight for us. If we don't fight for ourselves, nobody else will. So we should learn how to protect ourselves from government growing too much, government not respecting the principle of subsidiarity and the autonomy and the liberty of the citizens and the institutions, and very often doing this, overstepping its limit through taxes and persecution of those who have a different educational project. So see the connection with the day of education and the different spiritual project. So that's why today we celebrate the World Day of Education, and we also celebrate the launch of such an important new book, Who Stole Their Youth? And so now we will see first a video, and I believe the first video is an introduction to the book, Who Stole Their Youth? You heard from me some words, and now you will see some images. Thank you.
I had fluctuating emotions reading this book. How could there be such absurd government? Really, absurd, absurd, absurd. It's just so out of the world. In real life, you're not satisfied with the service, you make a complaint to the customer service center, and immediately you get a phone call of an apology, and that's how it works. But it does not work with our government. While I was reading this book, two things came to my mind. What an absurd government! And what if it was me who had to face such absurdity? What was I supposed to do? Could I sustain 24 years? Could you? You or me may not endure a year or two, or even just a month, 2 months, right? All inequalities and injustices that exist in our society are unbearable, just like the painful declaration on the back cover of this book. Who knew our beloved country could hurt us so? Our tears were exhausted. Many people who were involved have passed away. We won't compromise anymore. We will bravely unveil the unreasonable administrative remedy system that traps people and makes them go in circles. People are going in circles and couldn't find a way out because they are fighting against the government machine that blocks the way. There is a huge black hole in Taiwan's taxation system. No one dared to reveal it before. But now I believe this case will definitely be redressed because the heaven and earth are watching. I believe injustice will eventually be rectified. I won't allow the truth to be treated as lies. I sincerely hope that Taiwan will become a country that truly values human rights, so that my children and grandchildren will be able to continue to live on this land of democracy and freedom. This is how I felt while I was going through this book. I very much want to terminate this absurd case. I decline to waste any more of my life on such absurdity. Over the years, I have noticed that the content of bestseller books usually benefits others as well as the author himself. Writing what one loves is self-benefiting. Loving it so much, then sharing is benefiting others. A book that benefits the author as well as the readers is an influential one. Most important of all, books should inspire people. This book inspires us to bravely move forward. It also inspires those who encounter difficulties to persevere. I believe this book will contribute greatly to the society and the country. It won't let down the heaven and earth. And hopefully, heaven and earth will help solve this case. Thank you all.
So thank you for this passionate introduction to the book by the publisher. The case of Tai Ji Men is not unique in the world. It's perhaps unique because it lasted for 24 and now 25 years. But when governments want to crack down on new religious and spiritual movements, they very often use taxes. And so that's why the Tai Ji Men case got such exceptional international interest. And we are continuously joined by scholars from all over the world who have paid attention to the Tai Ji Men case. So today we have with us Professor Boris Falikov, talking to us from Moscow, from Russian State Universities of Humanities, and he will offer some reflection on the Tai Ji Men case compared to a broader international scenario. So, Professor Falikov, the floor is yours. You have to unmute yourself. You are still on mute. You are still on mute. You have to unmute yourself, the microphone. You should find an icon to mute or unmute. Voila, now it's okay. It's okay now. Okay.
Thank you very much, Massimo. You know, I'd like to take up the theme, the subject of absurdity of the government, which is, you know, very close to the heart of every Russian, especially today. But I'll speak about tax justice and persecution of minority religions as it is connected with the case of Tai Ji Men. The action of Taiwan Tax Bureau, which spent 24 years on taxation case against Qigong school Tai Ji Men, reminds me of a play of Eugène Ionesco, one of the masters of the theater of absurd. Usually such things are shown on scene as parables of gross injustice, but sometimes they do happen in real life, as is the case they reflect upon. The victims of this injustice are students of Qigong that is very popular not only in Taiwan, but everywhere in the world. Qigong is based on esoteric Taoism, but Tai Ji Men has a very wide cultural program and is tolerant of different religious worldviews. This approach lets Tai Ji Men carry on a successful international activity and found academies in various countries. It also participates in the world peace movement. This multifaceted activity makes it easy for a foreigner like myself to share the values of Tai Ji Men and to support it in its plight when a blind bureaucratic machine has been persecuting it for almost a quarter of a century. It's very gruesome that such an internationally renowned movement used to be persecuted in Taiwan as an evil cult. Now its name is cleared of many accusations, but some of the false tax evasion accusations still linger. They are like a bad dream one wants immediately to escape. But this bad dream boorishly intrudes on real life. In August of the last year, the National Tax Bureau seized and auctioned properties of Dr. Huang, the founder and spiritual leader of Tai Ji Men. In Russia, it is even easier to understand this sad case of persecution. Religious and spiritual minorities have a difficult life in my country. The anti-cult movement is on the rise and closely connected with law enforcement agencies, siloviki in Russian. Anti-cult leaders like Alexander Dworkin, affiliated with the Russian Orthodox Church, managed to convince the Russian authorities that new religious movements set a real threat not only to the church, but to the state itself. That's why all means are good to make their life miserable. Unjust taxation is one of them. Orthodox Church and other so-called traditional religious organizations are tax exempt, but the new religious movements were often charged with tax evasion as their religious rituals were considered secular products and were due to heavy taxation. The arguments of Russian Vaishnavas, Hare Krishna movement, that producing prasadam, food devoted to Krishna, was religious activity and not to be taxed were ignored. Accusations of Scientology of tax evasions was a common thing. However, when I started to monitor the present day situation with taxation of religious minorities in Russia for my paper today, I was surprised to see that tax evasion accusations of new religious movements became rare. The last one happened in 2019 when St. Petersburg Church of Scientology was accused of it. But alas, I had no time for a sigh of relief. I have discovered immediately that persecutions became even harder with more ruthless instruments used. The major weapon of fighting new religious movements in Russia now is a new law on religious extremism. Based on this law, the Jehovah's Witnesses were banned in Russia to the dismay of the whole world. Now, the Jehovah's Witnesses and Scientologists are not only fined for tax evasion, but put into prisons for religious extremism. Of course, there is a certain logical contradiction in it. First, Siloviki try to deprive new religious movements of their religious status, making them to pay taxes for their religious activity, but then they accuse them of religious extremism. But logic was never a strong side of Russian Siloviki, and I'm afraid of the law enforcement agencies in general. Their target is to destroy what they consider to be an enemy of the state by any means, and they don't need logic for it, but brutal force. Of course, I understand that my words may sound like a consolation to the persecuted members of Tai Ji Men. Don't worry, things are much worse in Russia. It is actually not necessary to go as far as Russia. In neighboring communist China, things are even worse. But such comparison would be a wrong reason for consolation. What I mean is rather a warning. My warning is based on the recent history of Russia. The situation with new religious movements in Russia was getting worse during the last 30 years. In 1992, the communist regime fell down and religious freedom came to the country where the policy of state atheism had been forced upon the population for 75 years. The new democratic constitution was introduced in 1993 with clauses on separation of state and church and freedom of conscience and of religion. Then things started to change for the worse. In 1997, an amendment for the law on religion was made, which introduced the idea of traditional and non-traditional religions. The new religious movements, which were new arrivals, got into latter category and started to come across difficulties. The religious experts, like myself, understood the danger of such religious inequality and started to fight against it, but new democratic state, unfortunately, decided to favor majority religions, like the Orthodox Church. The reason is clear. They wanted to improve the electoral base. By the beginning of the next decade, persecution of new religious movements became stronger, which was quite expected. The anti-cult movement started to gain grounds, and its leaders made friends with law enforcement agencies. As Vladimir Putin came to power, the trend towards authoritarian rule began to increase, and persecution of religious minorities became an inevitable part of it. The liberal opposition to Putin's regime tried to stop these trends. But liberals did not pay much attention to religious persecutions, considering it a minor issue. They mostly had a secular mentality, and new religious movements for them were non-important minorities with bizarre worldviews. But by today, the liberal opposition itself became an almost non-existent minority. And their mentality looks to pro-Putin's majority as bizarre as the views of Hare Krishnas look to them, the irony of history. This is why the fight for religious freedom for minority is so important for democracy. If minorities lose their freedom, the society at large risks to lose it too. This logic is demonstrated by the example of Russia, but it's a valid warning to democratic countries too. Taiwan is a democratic country, and is moving in the political direction opposite to that of Russia. But we know that the road to progress is a bumpy one. It looks like there are still some vestiges of authoritarian tendencies in some Taiwanese social institutions, like Tax Bureau, in the Tai Ji Men case. And to fight them is very important. That's why I think that staunch opposition of Tai Ji Men to the false accusations of tax evasion plays a great role for the democratic climate in Taiwan. If people are not aware of such injustice, things might change for the worse. It looks like it started to happen in Taiwan already, actually. First one is pay unjust taxes. Then once property is confiscated, as in the case of Dr. Huang. Next, one might be accused of religious extremism. It's exactly what happened in Russia, and I would not like it to happen in Taiwan. That's it. I'm finished.
Thank you. And I believe this is an important reminder that we need to be vigilant because situation of tax persecution can escalate into persecution in general. And the situation of alternative spiritual or educational group is always precarious. That is not a problem only in Russia. We have seen it in the old Europe, Western Europe, including in France. And that's why I'm now asking Christine Mirre, who is Deputy Director of the ECOSOC accredited NGO coordination of the Association and Individuals for Freedom of Conscience, to take the floor. You will see the name Thierry Val, that's the director of CAPLC, that's the acronym of the organization. She's using his account, but she's not Thierry Val, she's actually Christine Mirre. So Christine, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for the invitation at this webinar. So, continue, please. So on the occasion of this webinar, I would like to share with you the experience we had in France on the use of fiscal weapons to attack spiritual groups. This French policy has very strong similarity with the case of Tai Ji Men in Taiwan. In 1996, the then Taiwanese government launched a crackdown on groups labeled as Xijiao or cults, which according to most scholars who have studied the incident was politically motivated. The crackdown also involved Tai Ji Men, although he had not taken political sides. In France, in 1996, the Parliamentary Commission of Inquiry established a blacklist of spiritual groups classified as cults. 172 movements were thus criminalized, and the policy of repression was instituted against these spiritual groups. Following this Parliamentary Commission of Inquiry, the Ministry of Justice published a circular in which is highlighted the tools of tax fraud that magistrates should use against the cult-labeled associations. In the same year, the Ministry of Interior also published a circular to highlight the crime of tax evasion to fight against cults. In the year that followed, it was the Jehovah's Witnesses in 1997, the Religious Association of the Pyramid Temple in 1995, the Association of the Knight of the Golden Lotus in 1995, and the Evangelical Pentecostal Church of Besançon in 1996, which will be attacked by the French tax services. All these associations will be declared fraudulent by the tax services and will be heavily condemned to tax adjustments of up to millions of euros in the case of Jehovah's Witnesses. All these spiritual groups, after having exhausted all legal remedies, have gone to defend their case to the European Court, where they will all be successful. France will be condemned for violation of Article 9, right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. Now, I will detail the most representative case, the one of the Jehovah's Witnesses. The Jehovah's Witnesses Association refused and asked that the tax exemption applicable to gifts and legacies to liturgical associations, unions of liturgical associations, and authorized religious congregations continue to be applied as every year before 1993. The tax administration tried to trick Jehovah's Witnesses by forcing them through imposed accounting audits to disclose hand-to-hand gifts, although there is no legal obligation to do so. There was a clear manipulation of the tax administration to corner the Association of Jehovah's Witnesses and, as it appeared afterwards, to kill them financially. This shows another similarity with the Tai Ji Men case. After having exhausted all legal means in France, in 2005, the Jehovah's Witnesses Association decided to appeal to the European Court. In its judgment of 30 June 2011, the European Court found a violation of Article 9, right to freedom of religion, noting that the supplementary tax assessment had concerned the entirety of the manual gifts received by the association, although they represented the main source of its funding. Its operating resources having thus been cut, it had no longer been able to guarantee to its followers the free exercise of their religion in practical terms. By a judgment of 5 July 2011, the court held that France was to reimburse the about 4 million euros for the taxes unduly claimed by the tax administration. The European Court rendered similar decision in favor of the 3 other associations questioned by the French tax services. Unfortunately, we can notice that this is the same strategy that it is used to destroy spiritual groups that disturb states for various reasons. Unable to find any fault that violates the law, the states deflect their own tax regulations in order to undermine these peaceful movements. Those cases we have just seen show that despite the fact that it is a long and difficult fight, it can be won. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. So we see it's really a global problem, and I believe it is important for those who are in the streets to protest in Taiwan to understand they are not fighting just for themselves. They are fighting for tax justice and religious and spiritual freedom to prevail in the world. And now we have another video, which is self-produced by Tai Ji Men, but I believe it's useful to show, and it is about the young and not so young people who took to the street last month to protest once again. And when I saw this video, it reminded me of my own youth. Perhaps was not stolen, but surely I went to the street many times for different causes. Some were successful, some were not successful. But I believe this video shows the spirit, which is a spirit of protest, but it's also a joyful spirit of people peacefully taking to the street, dancing, singing, not wanting to offend anybody, but to exert their right to peaceful protest as citizens. So it's perhaps a very Taiwanese video, but I believe many would enjoy it.
相和气，人间中心生不息，意大利生命相安定。
Well, as I said, it reminds me very much that when I was in college, and perhaps Marco Respinti here, like in when we were fighting for the liberty and independence of the countries breaking out of communism, Poland and the Baltic states. We also slept in the street to prepare for marching and parading. But I believe there is one point in the book which for me was very interesting, and it's some of these young people reporting about their dialogue with journalists. And the journalists were asking them, here we see thousands and thousands and thousands of people coming from all of Taiwan to demonstrate in the street. Perhaps just the cost of this demonstration of renting public spaces, headphones, perhaps just this cost is higher than what is left to pay as taxes. Why do you do this? Why don't you just pay the taxes and go on to do other things? And the answer is the young people, it's because if we give up and pay these unjust and illegal taxes, and they are unjust and illegal because courts of law say this in Taiwan, it's not our personal opinion. Next time the government will target another group, spiritual, not spiritual, it doesn't matter. And then this other group also say, oh, it's more expensive to fight than to pay, so they will pay. And then another group, and then another group, and then perhaps from tax injustice, the bureaucrats will move to other injustices, as Boris Falikov was saying. So, of course, they are fighting for a principle. I have always observed that just in legal expenses, 25 years of litigation costed much more than what was asked as taxes. But it's a principle, and this is a movement based on conscience. They lobbied successfully the United Nations to create the World Day of Conscience. So, of course, for them, conscience is more important than money. And all these people, you have seen thousands and thousands of people peacefully in the streets of Taipei, they were not there for some money. They were there for principle and for conscience. And that, in a way, shows that education given to them in the Tai Ji Men academies worked and converted them into citizens able to think with their own brains and not to be dictated by the prevailing wisdom. So now I will pass the floor to Marco Respinti, who is an Italian journalist and the director in charge of the daily magazine on religious liberty and human rights, Bitter Winter, and he will introduce a round table where several Tai Ji Men Dizi will share their personal experiences.
Yes, thank you so much, Massimo, for reminding when we were in the street also. And thank you for introducing me. It's always a pleasure to share the floor with people who suffer for their own belief, underlining how important are fundamental beliefs, like religious beliefs. And thank you very much. I'm very sincere here. for the video that you just showed. Very inspiring. Is not common this day outside religious circles to hear inspiring words speaking of chivalry, heroism. It's becoming really heroic to exert one's own rights to freely believe. I want to introduce this roundtable, just reminding that we're once more reasoning around the key concept of religious freedom, religious liberty, and religious liberty can be defined as the immunity from coercion on individual or social groups by any human power, so that no one is to be forced to act in a manner contrary to his own beliefs, whether privately or publicly. I think we may have different views on religions and even on religious freedom, but this basic definition, which I crafted from many documents regarding this subject, can we can all agree on this basic understanding of what religious freedom is, to the point that we can define religious freedom as safe haven from which any human power, especially a state, because it's a huge human power, should stay out. Many times in my writing, I have defined religious freedom as a no-flight zone. State should stay at the border of religious freedom, and it should never, for no reason, enter that no-flight zone, because even when it says it comes in for good reason, the result is always disputable and oftentimes bad. The case of Tai Ji Men gets us to the connection between religious freedom and taxes. Let me just remind what taxes are. You all know what taxes are because you pay taxes, but it's sometimes important to remind us that taxes are the way by which states, especially modern states, sustain themselves. This is the first point. Second point, taxes are paid by citizens. Third point, states take money, a lot of money, from citizens to sustain themselves, and they give back to citizens services and protection, or supposedly. So at the end of the day, taxpayers seem to use states to provide for themselves. In this case, citizens should be in control of much of the bureaucratic state machine, especially when it deals with taxes. But this is highly theoretical. In fact, practically, taxes are a strong power given to states, given in the hands of the states. If a state uses taxes against its citizen, then it reverses completely what taxes are devised for, which is the protection of citizens. Taxes are a great power in the hands of the state in comparison to groups and individuals. There is no such thing as comparing the power that a private group or a family or individuals have compared to what a state has when it comes to taxes. And more than that, it's almost an infinite power in the hand of the states, especially if citizens are progressively spoiled of their factual power to resist. I want to just underline in a second the great power and need for private money. Anyone who has a family or is an individual living by his own, her own, or run an organization know how much we need to have the right to defend us also economically. And I want to just finish out with connecting to what Massimo just said. This is not also the battle for private money, for economic independence of family, individuals, and groups, especially religious groups and organizations, is not primarily a matter of money, is a matter of principle. It deals with money, of course, But it's not money the first point. The first point is to have the right to religious freedom and to sustain the public life that comes directly, the public behavior that groups and individuals have when they join religious groups. And money is a substantial part of defending that no-fly zone upon which the state should never fly. This is the day of education. Let me just finish with reminding that many times, both in totalitarian governments and in democratic governments, just like Taiwan, with the case of Tai Ji Men, the fight against religious freedom using state tools like taxes is oftentimes conducted by labeling religious groups as backwards, non-educated, and barbaric sometimes. This is an easy way to try to put their enemies out of the game, and we should, as it has been said today when we began our webinar, we should just we always need to defend a proper definition of what education is and alternative education is provided by a religious group. Many times religious groups are a reserve of better education than what the state provides. This is why the states oftentimes perceive religious groups as enemies. But I've taken too much time, and so far for my brief consideration. Our program now goes on with the witnesses that some Tai Ji Men, Dizi will share with us, and this is very precious because we, as me, living in the West, we live outside the peculiar situation of the Tai Ji Men, and it's always important to hear directly from the people who suffer this persecution what the situation is. So our first panelist on this roundtable is Ms. Shu-Ying Chang, forgive my awful Chinese pronunciation, counseling teacher in Taiwan and author of the book that we are presenting today. So the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you, Marco. Professor, expert, scholars, and distinguished guests, good day. I'm Shu-Ying Zhang, and I'm Ruby too. I'm one of the author of the Who Stole Their Youth. 25 years have passed, but many names and things remain engraved on our hearts, which we haven't forgotten and will never forget. One can choose to hide this painful memory or to look back with tears of sadness and resentment. But we decided to bring to light these memories in hope to save this country and its people. I was one of the tens of thousands of victims of Tai Ji Men case that started on December 19th, 1996. This 25 years case of injustice has affected people across 3 generations. The youth of a Tai Ji Men disciple has been taken away. Justice and the rules of the law have been taken away. What is even more important is the hope for a better nation has been taken away as well. We published the book Who Stole Their Youth, describing the ordeal of 25 years. What has happened cannot go unrecorded. The mistake in history have to remembered. We insist on doing the right thing. In addition, Tai Ji Men case is not an exception. There are many similar cases of persecution by the tax bureau. We hope more people will get to know the truth and fight for our rights as taxpayers. The English translation of the book will be available this year. We appreciate the helping hands from our international friends. Let's work together to solve this case and save Taiwan. Thank you all.
Thank you so much for your witnesses, as one of the author, and we really want the book in English so that many more people will be able to read it directly and to understand what is really going on. So thank you so much. Our second panelist is Dr. Zhi-Long Chen, Chairman of the Taiwan Association for Financial Criminal Law Study. Professor, Chairman, the floor is yours.
What does the International Day of Education mean to us? In Taiwan, there is room for improvement in the separation of powers and human rights. We will use the Tai Ji Men case as an example because this case is a living textbook on the subjects of law and taxation. Through proper legal and taxation education, people can gain correct knowledge and acquire the ability and courage to distinguish true from false and right from wrong. The Tai Ji Men case is a typical case of human rights violations by the government. In addition to the legal means, the Taiwan government has used taxation to violate the people's rights to freedom of belief, their right to participate in cultural life, and their right to freedom of speech and freedom of assembly and association. It is also a case that goes against the people's quest for truth and justice. The case revealed forgery, fabricated evidence, fabricated amount of money, fake law, and the fact that the case was fabricated for political reasons. This case also involves bullying, corruption, and profiteering. So when we review the Tai Ji Men case, we will find that it has three main characteristics: fabrication, bullying, and corruption. We found that one of the problems with the case is that the government did not protect human rights, but it protects the officials' power instead. A few government officers committed crimes, but they have not been punished, and the mistakes have not been corrected. This problem shows that the government agency acted arbitrarily in exercising its discretion and its anti-human rights, that is, abusing its power. This also shows the problem of violations of the law in its handling of the case. This problem actually needs to be thoroughly reviewed. This is very important. On the occasion of the International Day of Education, all the people of Taiwan should reflect on the case and thoroughly review it and redress the injustice. First, we should have human rights education. We should get rid of the old notion that the power of the government officials is superior and that those in power have the highest priority. Civil servants or government officials are not always right. The government officials and civil servants must also receive human rights education. This is the first key point. Second, the principle of legality must be honored and followed, and the administrative agency must perform their duties in accordance with the provision of the law. That is, they cannot go against the law. Any violation of the law and abuse of power are not allowed. The principle of legality is very important, and it cannot vary from person to person. The government cannot deprive the people of their property and freedom for political reasons, which is against the law. Tai Ji Men Qigong Academy has had no tax problems since its establishment in 1966, but it unexpectedly received tax bills for 6 years, from 1991 to 1996. These unjustified tax bills have lasted for almost 25 years. Finally, the tax amount was corrected to zero for 5 of the 6 years, except for 1 year. Obviously, the underlying facts for the 6 years are the same, but the treatment of one of the years was completely different from the others. And this wrong tax bill led to the confiscation of Tai Ji Men's property. This is a problem, not to mention that the Supreme Court, the court of third instance, has already found Tai Ji Men not guilty of tax evasion or violation of tax codes. According to the law, the tax bill should have been revoked. They failed to revoke a tax bill that should have been revoked. This is an even bigger problem. Third, the rules of evidence are very important here. Regarding the Tai Ji Men case, its leader didn't owe any tax, but a fake tax case was created, and then the amount involved was unreasonably inflated. On December 19, 1996, the day of the search of Tai Ji Men by the prosecutor and investigators, false information was disseminated, and the next day, major newspaper reported that Tai Ji Men have defrauded people of 3.1 billion NT and was involved in tax evasion. However, according to the bank's letter to the prosecutor dated December 28, 1996, the total balance of the two accounts related to the case was only 610,000 NT. This money was not tuition of a cram school or business income. The prosecutor ignored the bank's letter about the matter and fabricated false amounts in his indictment, falsely claiming that the two accounts amounted to more than 3.2 billion NT. The prosecutor claimed that they were fraudulent proceeds and asked the court to confiscate them according to the law. He also claimed that the same money was tuition of a cram school and business income and transferred the case to the National Taxation Bureau for tax collection. It was surprising that this kind of falsification, which is against evidentialism, was not corrected. Therefore, we hope that the reform of Taiwan's law and tax laws can resolve the old fake cases and end the bullying and the corruption, and only after these three major problems are solved will Taiwan be able to say it has human rights education. Until then, we cannot say the government agencies will protect human rights, the people will be protected by the law, and the people will be protected by having favorable evidence. Therefore, on this International Day of Education in Taiwan, the main point is to change the anti-human rights practices in the past into protection of human rights, as well as to redress the Tai Ji Men case and return the confiscated property to the leader of Tai Ji Men. This is the real meaning of this International Day of Education to Taiwan. On this International Day of Education, I hope the Tai Ji Men case in Taiwan can be rectified. If it is redressed, other cases of injustice can also be rectified according to the standard. Any case of injustice in Taiwan should be rectified. I hope we will no longer see the old practices, abuse of power and arbitrary actions by the authorities. The principle of legality, the rules of evidence, and human rights standards must be followed in all cases. That is the real goal and the direction of Taiwan's legal and tax reform.
Thank you so much to our financial criminal law expert for reminding us that many times dealing with the state is highly problematic and that the human being should always come first in comparison to the state. Our next panelist is Dr. Chun-Chieh Huang, professor in the Department of Financial and Economic Law in the National Chung-Chieh University in Taiwan.
One of the problems with the legal education in Taiwan is that we put too much emphasis on description in words, but in practice, we obviously lack a deeper understanding of the application of some cases. The Tai Ji Men tax case at the constitutional level involves whether the government infringes on only the property rights of the taxpayers, namely the people. In fact, the people include Tai Ji Men itself and Tai Ji Men Shifu, master, and Dizi, disciples. If we limit the rights only to property rights, we can easily overlook the fact that a very important type of fundamental constitutional rights includes the right to participate in cultural life and the right to freedom of religion in addition to property rights. There are also Tai Ji Men Shifu and Dizi rights to survival and personal freedom. Regarding the compensation for unlawful imprisonment for the victims in the Tai Ji Men case, we can see that the prosecutorial investigation procedure was not careful enough. Before the criminal decision was rendered, the taxation procedures already began. For the consolidated taxes for the 6 years in the Tai Ji Men case, we also found that surprisingly, the court decision for one of the 6 years was different from that for the other 5. Through Tai Ji Men Shifu's and Dizi's fight for their rights in the past 20 plus years, the foundation of legal education has been strengthened. Our legal education, informality, and administrative procedures should pay attention to taxpayers, who are the people, including the organizations formed by the people. In the Tai Ji Men case, the organization is Tai Ji Men, and the people are the Shifu and Dizi. If we elevate the traditional relationship between the Shifu and Dizi to the so-called legal relationship, we, as legal professionals, should value the nature of this relationship. The relationship between the Dizi and the Shifu has to do with the monetary gifts for the Shifu as a token of respect for him. The nature of the monetary gifts is the essence of the Tai Ji Men case. When you want to make a legal characterization of the monetary gifts, you must not lose sight of nature of such gifts. When exercising the administrative power of taxation, civil servants should pay attention to the legal status of the tradition of the monetary gifts given by the Dizi to the Shifu. Civil servants in a law enforcement agency must go deeper than an average student and the public to understand the various relationships in life. If this is elevated to the legal level, then our law must not deny the nature of the Shifu-Dizi relationship. We must also affirm the Supreme Administrative Court, which after the final judgment was rendered on the case concerning the taxes for 1992, was finally willing to acknowledge that this kind of relationship is not a counterparty relationship in a cram school, but it is rather regrettable that the legal education for our administrative officers, including those in the National Taxation Bureau and the enforcement agencies, is not deep enough to make them understand this matter. Regarding the consolidated income taxes for the 6 years, the tax amount was corrected to 0 for 5 of the 6 years. Before the auction was carried out, the enforcement agency was already informed of this fact and the Supreme Court's final decision, but they were not willing to face the facts. I think this is the most fundamental problem of our legal education. The law is to protect human rights, especially when the Taipei High Administrative Court has issued 2 letters to the tax agencies about this matter. In other words, our judiciary has informed our executive branch that it should do a self-reflection in accordance with our relevant laws and regulations. However, our executive branch and administrative agency still carried out the enforcement on the Tai Ji Men case concerning the taxes for 1992. From the legal point of view, especially from the perspective of the administrative enforcement law, if there is an error in the enforcement procedure or enforcement itself, there will still be the issue of damages and compensation, that is, the issue of national compensation. The principle of legality of the taxation law is a requirement not only for our civil servants but also for our people. The procedure must be legal and the substance must be legal. Any slightest violation of law will make the tax disposition illegal. If the nature of a cultural and religious organization is misidentified, and of course the organization will insist on protecting its rights to the end, because of its nature is not correctly understood, then even if it is a $1 tax bill, it is still an infringement of their right to property, their right to participate in cultural life, and their right to freedom of religion or belief. Therefore, we hope that for such a real-life teaching material on the rule of law, both the country and the people should take it seriously and treat it as a very important teaching material for legal education. In Tai Ji Men case, its property rights are infringed because the government does not clearly understand its nature. In 2018, the Supreme Administrative Court finally confirmed that our tax authorities should correctly recognize the nature of the relationship between Tai Ji Men Shifu and his Dizi, and that it is not a cram school. What does this mean? This means that it is not the so-called general right to work, but other fundamental rights other than the right to work. In fact, this case involves the related rights such as the right to participate in cultural life and the right to freedom of religion or belief under Article 18 of the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights. Regarding the human rights education materials for the Administrative Enforcement Agency under the Ministry of Justice, the right to freedom of religion or belief is still within the scope of the Constitution or the laws in respect to tax enforcement. Therefore, from the point of view of human freedom, we must not simply regard infringement of taxpayers' rights as only an infringement of property rights.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry. Some technical problems, so I lost partially. I lost the final sentences of our latest speaker. But I just want to underline, as he said, how delicate is the relationship between state and religious groups. Sometimes state don't have the mind, the understanding to understand the very nature of relationship, just like donation. of religious groups. So they always should step one step back. Our next speaker is a Tai Ji Men Dizi, and she's Jaicy Su, patent engineer. The floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jaicy. I work as a patent engineer in an electronics company to protect its intellectual property. When I was a child, I was often sick and lacked self-confidence. Later on, I joined Tai Ji Men with my parents. Our master, Dr. Huang, has been guiding us to do what is right and get rid of our bad habits. And I also follow him to conduct cultural activities, promoting love and peace, both at home and abroad. However, since December 1996, some officials in Taiwan, by misusing legal and taxation measures, have tried to destroy Tai Ji Men and its several thousand-year-old culture. They use the media to smear us. As a result, we have been misunderstood and discriminated against by others in the nation. Finally, in 2007, the Supreme Court found Tai Ji Men not guilty of tax evasion or any other charges. And Tai Ji Men and my Shifu didn't owe any tax. We thought both the criminal case and the tax case would have ended. But last August, the Taiwanese government violated our human rights again by illegally auctioning my master's land. The Tai Ji Men case started when I was an elementary school student. Now I am a mother. But the fabricated case has not yet been fully rectified. As a victim, I began to pay close attention to the legal and tax issues. The purpose of taxation, I think, is to help all citizens enjoy a better life. But there are many tax victims in Taiwan. The Tai Ji Men case has revealed many problems of Taiwan's tax system, and I will share some of my observations. First, many officials would falsify evidence. It is a traditional custom for my Dizi in a martial arts organization to give a monetary gift to my Shifu, and such gifts are tax-free income under the law. When prosecutor Huang could not find any evidence to prove that Tai Ji Men had violated the law, he joined forces with a tax official who committed perjury, falsely claiming that Tai Ji Men is a crime school. But in fact, it is a martial arts organization. The purpose was to destroy Tai Ji Men through taxation. The tax bureau falsely claimed that the monetary gifts in the form of red envelopes for my master was tuition of a crime school, and only based on the prosecutor's indictment, issued huge tax bills to Tai Ji Men for 6 years. But how can an indictment that has not been examined by the court be used as a basis for taxation? How could these unjustified tax bills be issued repeatedly? There was a dishonest high-ranking official named Zhang Shenghe. He was the head of the Tax Bureau of Taipei in 2000, and later promoted to the head of the Taxation Administration, Deputy Finance Minister, and Chair of Petition Committee, and then Finance Minister in 2012. He retired in 2016. He was the tax official that had been most deeply involved in the Tai Ji Men case and for the longest time. He attended a public hearing in the Legislative Yuan on December 21st, 2000, as the head of the Tax Bureau of Taipei, and heard the representative of the Ministry of Education saying that Tai Ji Men is not a cram school. Aware of this fact, he still allowed his subordinates to continue to tax Tai Ji Men as a cram school. Because there was no evidence to justify the tax bills, the petition committee under the Ministry of Finance had revoked the tax bills 5 times as of 2002 and requested the Tax Bureau to investigate the nature of the red envelopes of my shifu. Then Zhang Shenghe, the head of the Tax Bureau of Taipei at that time, started to lead his agency to conduct an investigation into the nature of the red envelopes for the first time. The Tax Bureau randomly selected 206 Tai Ji Men Dizis and sent them survey forms. It collects a total of 206 survey forms. It collects a total of 206 survey forms, all of them indicating the red envelopes were gifts. By law, the Tax Bureau should have provided the 206 survey forms to the petition committee for consideration, but the Tax Bureau hid them and fabricated evidence for the petition committee, inaccurately recording that only 9 people indicating the red envelopes were gifts, and did not provide the survey form to the parties concerned. Then the Tax Bureau of the Central Area in Taiwan had entrusted its counterpart of Taipei to investigate the case. And it also uses the 206 survey forms as reference. Likewise, the Tax Bureau of the Central Area falsely recorded that only 5 people indicating the red envelopes were gifts, deceiving the petition committee and the Taichung High Administrative Court. Without a justified reason, the Tax Bureau had issued huge tax bills and conduct the investigation years later. The tax agencies even falsified evidence, which is against the rules of evidence. So the tax bill shall be invalid from the very beginning. Second, improper barrier for applying for an administrative relief. In the United States, regardless of tax amount, with $60, people can file a petition or lawsuit. However, in Taiwan, there is an unreasonable law that requires people to pay half of the tax amount or an equivalent guarantee during the phase of a petition. Otherwise, the enforcement agency could enforce their property, meaning that the administrative agency can dispose of people's assets based on the tax bill. In such an administrative relief system, tax officers and taxpayers are not treated equally, which substantially deprives the people of their right to relief and is against the 2 international covenants, ICCPR and ICESCR. Many tax victims simply cannot afford to apply for an administrative relief. Before a tax bill is determined to be correct, the people's property has already been disposed of. Too many companies closed down. Too many companies closed down. Too many innocent taxpayers died without their names being cleared, and too many families broke up just because unlawful tax bills. The Tai Ji Men case is even more ridiculous because all of Dr. and Mrs. Hong's property was frozen by the prosecutor Huang, So how could they possibly provide a guarantee for the huge tax bills? And their inability to do so would result in their property being auctioned. Therefore, Tai Ji Men filed a claim, saying that since the first criminal trial would soon be decided, if the property was unfrozen after the court decision, they could provide a guarantee for the tax bills. And the Tax Bureau and Enforcement Agency agreed to delay the enforcement until November 2nd, 2003. On September 25th, 2003, Dr. Huang and his co-defendants were acquitted in the first trial. And on October 15th of the same year, the Taipei District Court notified the Tax Bureau of Taipei that the access has been unfrozen. Then the head of Tax Bureau of Taipei, Zhang Shenghe, and his staff knew that after the access were unfrozen, Dr. Huang's wife had been forced to use their property as a guarantee, and the enforcement should not be carried out according to Article 39 of the Tax Collection Act, and the agreed upon deadline of November 2nd was not passed yet. However, on October 20th, Zhang Shenghe sent a letter to the enforcement agency of Taipei, requesting early enforcement and allowed his subordinate to falsify an official document using whiteout to change the original date of the letter from October 20th to October 15th, the date of the court unfrozen the access, pretending that they did not know that the access had been unfrozen. So without the knowledge or permission of Dr. Huang's wife, the government sold her stocks and withdrew all the money in a bank account. Later on, during the trial at Taipei High Administrative Court, the judge uncovered the backdating and the forgery, and the officer of Tax Bureau of Taipei admitted in the court to backdating. Only then did the Tax Bureau of Taipei, under the leadership of Zhang Shenghe, return the money in the name of tax refund. But it has caused irreparable losses, and the interest all has not yet been repaid to Mrs. Huang. The Tax Bureau has owed money to Mrs. Huang and hasn't paid it back, but tax officers involved in the unauthorized sale of her assets received bonuses. Instead of being punished for his illegal activities, Zhang Shenghe had been promoted to Minister of Finance and then retired safely. Now he is teaching at a university. Such an illegal official has not been punished. Won't this encourage his former subordinates to follow suit? Encouraging more corruption, poisoning his students, and creating more tax victims? Over the past 25 years, I've seen many problems with Taiwan's tax systems. It is really heartbreaking to see illegal tax officials bully the people and receive bonuses. On this International Day of Education, I would like to thank you all and other many experts and scholars for voicing their support for Tai Ji Men, educating government agencies and public on the importance of tax reform. I hope that the fabricated Tai Ji Men case will be rectified as soon as possible, which will lay a milestone on the road of tax reform in Taiwan. Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Jaicy, for your heartfelt testimony. And this reminds me and us that we are speaking of principles, of first principles, but we are not dealing with an intellectual, merely an intellectual question. We sometimes don't evaluate how much offensive and sorrowful is for persecuted people also even administrative persecution like that of the Tai Ji Men case. It's now the turn of Dr. Linda Chen, postdoctoral research associate in the Department of Pathology in Dalhousie University, Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada. She's a Tai Ji Men thesis. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Marco. My name is Linda Chen, and as Marco said, I'm a postdoctoral research associate in the Department of Pathology at Dalhousie University at the East Coast of Canada. I study human rare genetic heart diseases, also helping students and trainees with their research projects. As we celebrate the International Day of Education today, I would like to share my experience as a student who finished elementary and high school in Taiwan and completed all my college education and graduate school in Canada, and now working in a Canadian university. In addition to the formal education environment, I'm also a Tai Ji Men Dizi, also known as student, or I like to refer it as a lifelong learner at Tai Ji Men. Tai Ji Men is a menpai, a traditional school of martial arts. The education I received from Tai Ji Men is filled with Eastern traditions and wisdom that bring out the best nature of a person. This vital line of cultural heritage has essentially been practiced and passed down from Shifu, the master, to Dizi, the disciples, generations after generations since ancient time. My uncle introduced me to Tai Ji Men, and I became a Dizi in 1995, just before I moved to Canada. I continue practicing Tai Ji Men Kung Fu on a daily basis, and it helps me finish my education in Canada, deals with all the ups and downs in life, and be the best version of myself. Tai Ji Men offers a lifelong learning opportunity. It provides me with a wholesome education that benefits not only to my overall health, but also tremendously to my personal and spiritual growth through self-cultivation and self-reflection. Shifu also guides me to be helpful to my community and brings positives to the humanity. All of this I couldn't have learned from the formal education at school nor at university. There's no doubt that the wisdom that I got from Tai Ji Men will continuously benefit me for the rest of my life journey. The lifelong mentorship I received from my Shifu is priceless and couldn't have been paid by a tuition fee. For the National Taxation Bureau in Taiwan to claim my gift to Shifu as a taxable income from tuition fee is unreasonable and ridiculous. Let's talking about education. I would like to take this opportunity sharing my view on the importance of a lifelong learning and problem-solving skills. Also, why government of Taiwan especially needs to promote and put the concept of lifelong learning into their school curriculum. So what's the lifelong learning and who needs it? Some professions like clinical doctors require to have lifelong learning, or sometimes refers as a continuing education to help with a professional development. A doctor usually practice for more than 30, 40 years after graduate from a medical school. It's essential for doctors to constantly learn. With new knowledge, doctors can confidently offer their patients the best care and to cure diseases with the most up-to-date methods. I think it's not just the profession like doctors needs lifelong learning. Every single one of the global citizens could also benefit from continuing education. Now, before I dissect a little deeper to the Tai Ji Men case that we're here for, let me share my childhood story about the education I received in Taiwan. I was in the 4th grade. There was an assignment. I need to write my thoughts after reading a short story. I didn't know how to write or where to start, so I asked my teacher for help. Instead of boosting my confidence by giving me some encouraging words or guiding me with some questions, I was simply handed with a book basically called Teacher's Guideline. It had the sample answers and viewed as the ultimate, the correct and perfect answers to all the assignment questions. I remember I read through it and I was still trying to find my own answers. My teacher saw my hesitation and said, come on, write down what you read from the teacher's guideline. You still have math problems and other homework to complete. So efficiencies seems to be a top priority. So get it done and move on is highly encouraged. I also rewarded with an almost perfect score on that assignment. I can tell you that wasn't an exceptional case. It was the rest of my elementary and all my high school life. By the last year of high school, I completely given up my motivations to think. I found no meanings of a life only knows how to copy paste answers and memorize that knowledge. I decided to leave the country. I thought by pursuing higher education in Canada, I could escape all that nightmare. However, the nightmare didn't just end there. Just look at what happened to the tax bill from Tai Ji Men case. The taxation amount was directly copied and pasted from prosecutor Ho's indictment, because that indictment was like the teacher's guideline at that time. For Taxation Bureau, it's much simpler to copy the gold standard answers than to investigate and search their own evidence. Plus, there will be always some higher level officials that help covering up if they choose to continue using their perfect answers. In addition, guideline copier potentially would be rewarded for their excellent performance, and that may also come with monetary bonus. Okay, let's not look at the incidents happened more than 20 years ago. Just last year, in 2020, I found this culture of copying and pasting, kicking balls back and forth, or to a different field, are still the way of how Taiwanese government officials solve problems. So I wrote letters to President Tsai and Premier Shu of Taiwan, raising my big concerns about the Tai Ji Men case. My first letter to the presidential office was quickly forwarded to the Taxation Bureau. A few days later, they found their teacher's guideline. They dug out the Supreme Administrative Court decision from 2006 concerning the taxes for 1992, which was wrong and illegal, copied and pasted their answer without searching for other court decisions after that. The other letter to the Premier Shu was again got forwarded quite efficiently. Also with their gold standard answer, they copy and paste from somewhere else. This time they even told me that they have the right not to answer my question because I had asked similar question before through the presidential office. So due to the time limit here, it's not possible to describe the whole Tai Ji Men case in such a short talk. However, I highly recommend everyone here to read the book Who Stole Their Youth when the English translation version becomes available. I still cannot believe that a government claiming to be a democratic internationally can be so openly violating people's economic, social, and cultural rights and show no concerns at destroying the living heritage. Such an intangible cultural heritage, the UNESCO has been making every effort to safeguard for decades. Perhaps some of the world human rights experts here and those people watching online can offer your insights to government of Taiwan because they clearly need much help. I believe international pressure and voices are powerful. It's much needed and appreciated. So in conclusion, traditionally, students in Taiwan are very good at learning knowledge-based materials. However, education system in Taiwan is far behind to the world standard in terms of equipping students with confidence, with real problem-solving skills, with a true desire to learn and continue learning after completing their formal education. Lifelong learning is vital to their education system. Thanks, the forum organizer provides the opportunity for me to speak here. I sincerely hope Taiwanese government will listen to the voices from international experts here, and Tai Ji Men case will receive the rightful justice in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda, for reconnecting the whole topic of the the serious Tai Ji Men case to the special day on education is very, very much important, and I really hope your appeal to the Taiwanese government will be heard as soon as possible. Our last witness for this session for this part of our program is, last but not the least, Mr. Duncan Lee, who is a certified public accountant and an accounting consultant and a Tai Ji Men Dizi. Mr. Lee, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Hi everyone, my name is Duncan. As was mentioned, I'm a CPA in California, specialized in accounting consultation for public and private companies. Throughout my life, my family lived in 3 different countries. So with that moving around, I was able to receive different educations based on different cultures. I realized the importance of education in any person's perception of the world. However, education each person is receiving is not only based in school, but also from the family and the society that's given. When I was younger, how I perceived events and society shaped how I see the world. When I was 13, I lived in New Zealand. Studying there was relaxing for me, but encouraging me to seek more knowledge and experiences with different fields. Information was fulfilling my mind at that age, widening my view about the world. It is also at that time when Mrs. Huang, brothers and sisters were illegally detained or persecuted. Back in 1996, when the internet wasn't as widely as of now, we were not aware of what happened in Taiwan, but we received a phone call from a relative from USA to New Zealand, questioning us what happened. We were confused and worried. When our father went to New Zealand later, that was when we were told the real story. He helped us understand what really happened and pointed out the false and illegal information released by Prosecutor Ho during the investigation. I was lucky because I had my family to give us the clear guidance to seeing what's right and what was wrong. Prosecutors carry out illegal searches, illegally release falsified information to the media, made unproven and unscientific claims, and even executed contradicting indictments. Some other people in Taiwan, especially those who were still students at the time, weren't so lucky. They were fed by the false information released to them. To me, it was education by the society. A lot of people who would believe if the police arrest someone and the news reported, then it must be true. It is built among people believing the government. And this is the reason prosecutors must adhere to the principle of secret investigation. Unfortunately, Prosecutor Ho violated this principle during the investigation of Tai Ji Men's case. During more than 400 false reports during the 4-month period of the investigation, and more than 70 broadcasts by 12 TV stations, seriously infringing on human rights of Tai Ji Men, Shifu, and Dizi, becoming the worst education of society. In 2002, Taiwan's Control Union, which is responsible for supervising and impeaching administrative officials after investigating the case, it announced that the prosecutor had violated investigations, searched illegally frozen assets, overstepping the authorities, and ordered the county and city governments to close academies, violating various judicial law. This is a serious infringement on the rights of the defendant and harm the prosecutor's image of impartial law enforcement. The report was then transferred to the Ministry of Justice for investigation, and it was determined that there was a contradiction between the indictment and the evidence, and the prosecution was initiated while not conforming to the law evidence. Control Yuan selected this case as major human rights violation case in the consolidated report for the Control Yuan's human rights protection work, but it is incredible that Prosecutor Ho was not punished for it and was even promoted to become Deputy Director of the Agency Against Corruption of the Ministry of Justice. In addition to the Tai Ji Men's case, there was also extraordinary fee case of Taiwan's former President Ma Ying-jeou and Union Westland case. and the case involving multiple high-ranking police officers' Sorensen video games, which had many violations of due process using illegal methods such as forced confession by custody, intimidated witness or defendant, documented fabricated responses, released false publications, and used media to manipulate public opinion to spread false information in an attempt to reach verdict before actual trials. Among them, the Sorensen case lasted for 24 years, involving around 200 defendants, including 3 prosecutors and 38 police officers. During the investigation, 4 police officers committed suicide. In the end, only 8 officers were convicted, which was only about 20%. Many high-ranking police officers who were prosecuted eventually found not guilty. In the Tai Ji Men case, which was indicted with false evidence dragged on for more than 10 years, which is not only found not guilty, even set a record for high-profile cases in Taiwan without changes in verdict during the appeals. All 4 Tai Ji Men Shifu and Dizi were illegally detained who received compensation from the government for it. President Ma was also found not guilty in the extraordinary fee case. The Univ case was entangled for 10 years, and the key defendant's statement was found to be fabricated. After the court's investigation, it was found that there were many discrepancies. The prosecutor's office then withdrew the statement. So during all these years, there was many different examples, and even in 2003, after the judicial court ruled Dr. Huang not guilty of the charges, the properties that was held was supposed to return to Dr. Huang, Mrs. Huang, but the tax bureau fabricated documents, backdated documents, in a way so they can sell the property of Dr. Huang, Mrs. Huang, so they can take the money away from the bank and also the cash turned from their properties. Illegally taking the money was therefore just their bonuses that they cannot return. So this is something that they would not admit up to today, and different government branches will cover for each other, violating the constitutions. There are more than 30 laws in Taiwan that will protect human rights and also from the covenants, but they would not admit to any of them. They would not follow any of them to resolve the cases properly and violating people's rights, taking over people's property illegally. So the prosecutor, up to today, who carry out the illegal prosecution, only received an admonition for the former President Ma's case and continue to promote in his career. Imagine what kind of punishment an ordinary person receives if one were to carry out those illegal acts. What kind of a social education does that give to the people? Does the government want future generations to believe that government officials can carry out illegal acts and get away with it? When I was 13, I did not understand the reason myself was charged for tax evasion. After I became older, I studied accounting in both high school and university, then got my CPA license. As I learned more about accounting, the more I understand what happened. It was nothing but illegal acts between different branches of the government. My father is also a CPA, so we would often discuss about differences and similarities of taxation between Taiwan and USA, and also the fabricated tax case against Tai Ji Men. We have always agreed that the tax bureau has illegally assessed a tax due. The approach is wrong. The method is violating basic human rights, and they just would not admit that they should not have issued a tax evasion claim in the first place back in 1997. Education has been critical, but I'm glad that I have met good teachers who guided me to learn the right knowledge, good family, to make sure I receive the correct information. Also, my sifu who taught me the wisdom to deal with everything positively in my life. I can say I'm blessed to have all of that throughout my life. I thank everyone for speaking out and allowing me to share my personal experience. I hope our messages can reach out and affect everyone positively. No one should be a victim of false information. Students to receive deceiving education in all aspects. I urge the government of Taiwan to right the wrong, stop the persecution, and truly educate people to do the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lee, for reminding us how the huge amount of falsities and fabrication that are involved in this serious Tai Ji Men case. And I do thank all of the Tai Ji Men Dizi and experts who spoke in this session for once more giving us the possibility to touch directly the sad reality of this case. And with this, I give back the floor to Professor Introvigne, I think.
So thank you, and I will ask those who have questions to write them in the chat line, but we are going to the conclusion, and the conclusions will be offered by Willy Fautré. But before that, there are a few questions, either here or on YouTube. And here is a question for Linda from Canada. And it's about your experience of explaining this Taiwanese case to people abroad. You were also a participant in the UNESCO conference in Warsaw. So do you believe it's easy or possible, or how would you suggest to do, to explaining to people living in countries with a different system such as Canada, the intricacies and in a way, as we heard, the absurdity of this Tai Ji Men case?
I think we need to fight for it. It's with Taiwanese government, it's from my experience of how I deal with them, it's not, of course I have a lack of confidence, but at the same time, because my Shifu taught me to be a good global citizen, and where when we see the problem for others, I would want to help out as well. And this is not just problems of others. This is a problem of my home too. It's I grew up there, and Tai Ji Men is my home. And talking about that, I think I will also like to share a little bit of what I learned from attending the online international scientific conference hosted in Poland that this past week, that the education and the theme was education and challenges of the multicultural world. There was this keynote speaker who gave an opening speech that I think it was very inspirational to me. And I feel like I hope more people can get inspired and take actions as well. So this Professor Adam Bodner, he is a commissioner for human rights in Republic of Poland. He said, we should not ignore what problems of other people facing. We should respond to what problem we see around us. If we ignore, that means we create a policy of acceptance. Once, twice, 5 or 10 times later, it becomes a culture of acceptance, accepting those problems. So perhaps some of the viewers online, like myself, a lot of time, by not taking actions, it's like we accept the existence of these problems, like corruptions, hatred, human rights issue, and we shouldn't let accepting problems of others become a culture. We need to make responding to problem around us a culture. So that's what I feel. Even if it's hard, we need to respond to the problem and to make it a culture. That's what I think. Thank you. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you. Yeah, there are several questions, but we need to go to the conclusion. So I apologize to those who ask questions, and I will pick up only one, which I find to be interesting, and perhaps Marco Respinti can answer it. And it is why the media in Taiwan were so much ready to believe, as Duncan Lee also explained to us, ready to believe even the most blatant lies coming from the prosecutor. And even if these lies were later exposed as lies by courts of law. And I'm directing this question to Marco because I believe we have the same problem in Italy, when whatever is said by prosecutor is immediately believed by the media. And even if after some years the courts of law would give the lie to the prosecutor and say, actually, the people arrested were entirely innocent, this happens after many years when the damage is done. And so people will remember what they read in the media in the first place, that the prosecutor has arrested somebody. So if somebody has been arrested, he or she should be the bad guy. So I believe the question of our listener is what can we do, and why journalists, it seems all over the world, it's not only a problem in Taiwan, are naive or something else in believing everything which comes from the prosecutors.
Thank you. Yeah, I will try to answer with the short answer, and the short answer, given we don't have much time, is that mainly journalists are lazy. And this is not a funny answer. Being lazy here, especially, I mean they're lazy in their way of listening to the truth, do research, do their homework, and produce a piece of journalism that is journalism, which means they should, of course, speak the truth and document the truth, not listening to his master's voice, as they oftentimes do. There are many reasons why journalists are this lazy. The worst examples we have when we speak with communist China, and we know that some of these, there is, plainly speaking, some bribery there. And we know that some journalists are bought technically by the government and the regime to become their mouthpiece. So this is the worst case. In the other cases, like in a democratic country, Taiwan, either Italy, it is far easier for journalists, as I said, it is much more easy and comfortable to take for granted what comes from the state, from power, from the judiciary. And this goes to the complex relationship between professions, private enterprises, and power. Many times journalists choose to become the mouthpiece of power instead of claiming truth. What we should do next, rely on the few good journalists that are there around the world. We have good journalists. We need to go after them and try to get their interest in cases like the Tai Ji Men case and, generally speaking, religious freedom cases. And we should never give up. It's a difficult task because government and states are big powers. Journalists, media can become big powers, especially when they don't speak for the truth and they repress the truth. But we should never give up. There is always a chance to reach a journalist, to put some executive notes in his pockets to get out some truth. And sometimes we can also educate journalists for going back to go back to the original roots of their profession. And this is the short answer again. There are many more details, but I think we ran out of time.
So thank you, Marco. And again, I apologize to others who ask questions, but we really need to go to our conclusions. And so I would ask Willy Fautré, who is a co-founder of Human Rights Without Frontiers, an NGO in Brussels, and one of the most knowledgeable persons outside Taiwan on the Tai Ji Men case, to offer the conclusions of this webinar. So Willy?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Massimo. The title of this conference, Education, Conscience, and Tax Justice, is quite appropriate for enlightening the never-ending fight of Tai Ji Men for justice. And all the speakers who have preceded me have abundantly illustrated the content of the book, Who Stole Their Youth, that has just been launched. So I will not repeat or summarize what has been said before me, because their testimonies and analyses were sufficiently explicit. I will rather focus on the message that Tai Ji Men has sent to the world outside through its 24-year-long battle. Conscience is what characterizes our human nature, and human beings are the only living beings on earth that have awareness of good and evil. This feature constantly needs to be preserved, nurtured, and developed through space and time. Yet this can only be achieved through education. Moral values are the blood that irrigates the minds of human beings. Family, school, religious, and philosophical movements are the arteries and the veins through which the blood of spiritual values can give oxygen to the human conscience and make it grow. This is what Tai Ji Men has been doing for decades, teaching and training the Dizis to live according to their conscience and according to their spiritual values, whatever the price to be paid, and never to compromise. Integrity, dignity, respect, compassion, love, and peace are at the heart of their values and of their life. Tai Ji Men's teachings make the disease aware of good and evil. Tai Ji Men's teachings are the blood that irrigates the souls of the disease. And the best ambassadors of Tai Ji Men's teachings to the outside world are the disease themselves, because they are the living testimonies of their spiritual values can regenerate individuals and society. However, the fight for the well-being of people also means to fight against evil forces. One of those evil forces in Taiwan that Tai Ji Men has been facing for 2 decades and a half is the National Taxation Bureau and its ally, Prosecutor Hu, nicknamed the Judicial Rambo. Quite a number of Taiwanese speakers before me have already exposed the circumstances and the details of the war waged by the tax administration and Prosecutor Hu against Tai Ji Men in violation of the foundations of democracy, the rule of law, and human rights. These have courageously testified about their sufferings for following their conscience. A book entitled Who Stole Their Youth has just been published in Mandarin. It is an invaluable source of information about the magnitude of the damage caused to Tai Ji Men and the disease by evil forces because they chose to follow their conscience. Fighting for justice is the right fight. And as Massimo Introvigne stressed in its introductory remarks, the followers of Tai Ji Men have learned in the hard way an important thing. If they didn't find themselves for their rights, nobody would do it for them. And they courageously did it. They did it very courageously, I must say. Some were not even born when the case started, and others died in the meantime, sometimes because of the huge stress coming from that ordeal. Then Christine Mirre from CAP, Freedom of Conscience in France, shared with us some other examples of fights for justice, and especially for tax justice. And the cases that she referred to were in France from groups that were blacklisted by the French state and subsequently persecuted for years by the tax administration. All of them won their cases. But the most dramatic one concerned Jehovah's Witnesses, as they had to fight for more than 1 decade in domestic courts and several more years in the European Court of Human Rights to obtain justice. The reimbursement of 4 million euros unduly charged and confiscated by the French state was returned to the Jehovah's Witnesses. So it was worse from that point of view to fight the big fight against the administration. But it's not a matter of money. It's a matter of justice. It's a matter of principle. Then I would also like to stress the testimony of Boris. He also encouraged the Tai Ji Men, Dizi, and other supporters to fight for tax justice. And from his experience in Russia, he noted that behind the persecution of minority religious or belief groups, there are always anti-cult activists. And also the false accusation of so-called tax evasion is really an easy one to be used to isolate a group and to isolate a group from the rest of society and to bully it until its destruction, if possible. So there is a strategy behind those attacks against Tai Ji Men. And then I would like to stress as well in the introduction by Marco Respinti, a very interesting comparison that there is a no-fly zone somewhere where the state is not allowed to interfere. It is a safe haven that is almost a sacred place. And in the case of Taiwan, the state has crossed the red line. It has crossed the red line, and this had had tragic consequences, because in such cases, when the state interferes in the private sphere and in the autonomy of a religious group, it's not only disputable, but it's always very bad, as Marco stressed. For almost 25 years, Tai Ji Men has been fighting against a number of evil forces and has chosen not to compromise with them. It would have been easy to pay a modest fine and hereby get rid of a burdensome and never-ending judicial battle. The Tai Ji Men has refused to follow the apparently easy road and has chosen to follow its conscience. Tai Ji Men had not cheated with Taiwan tax administration, so there was therefore no other choice than to refuse to admit any non-existing wrongdoing and any supposed guilt. By just paying an illegal tax and a small fine, Tai Ji Men would have recognized its alleged guilt. It would have lied. It would have made a perjury. It would have denied itself. It would have lost its face and its credibility forever. It would have sold its soul. It would have offered a total victory on a golden plate to the evil forces which want to weaken and destroy it. So Tai Ji Men made the right choice, but a difficult choice. Tai Ji Men preferred to spend the necessary time, energy, and financial means for justice with a capital J, whatever the cost. Justice not only for themselves, but for all those who are victims of the oppression of the tax administration. Tai Ji Men's battle is not only for Tai Ji Men and his disease, it is a battle for the well-being of all the Taiwanese, for Taiwanese society, and for the image of Taiwan on the international scene. Tai Ji Men's voice and deeds have attracted many Taiwanese experts in legal and political matters who have joined their voices to its fight for democracy, the rule of law, and human rights. Tai Ji Men's education program raises and awakens the consciences of those who thirst for righteousness. The conference, Education, Conscience, and Text Justice, and the book Who Stole Their Youth perfectly reflect the battle for justice with a capital J, fought by Tai Ji Men and the disease. In the fire of oppression, they have shown a dead rock face in their values, and they have passed the torch to the next generation. Thank you very much.
So thank you to Willy Fautré, and thank you to the technical personnel who made this webinar possible. It was not an easy task to coordinate people in 3 very different time zones, Taiwan, United States, and Western Europe. But I believe this shows the globalized nature of this problem. So I want to thank the international speakers, Boris Falikov from Russia, Christine Mirre from France, Marco Respinti from Italy, and Willy Fautré from Belgium, and the Taiwanese witnesses who are not only Taiwanese. Actually, Linda is from Canada and Duncan is from United States. And if I can conclude with coming back to this notion of the no-fly zone of Marco, in these days, many countries are expressing solidarity to Taiwan because its physical no-fly zone is being violated by a bigger neighboring country. But I believe Taiwan needs friends and needs credibility as a democracy to get more friends throughout the world. And so if they want their physical no-fly zone to be protected and defended by other countries, they should respect that other no-fly zone of human rights. So most of us have been to Taiwan. We like Taiwan. We appreciate its rich cultural life and pluralism in contrast with other non-democratic countries in the region. But then the Tai Ji Men case teaches us that no democratic society is fully democratic, and we have to be continuously vigilant not to start going to a slippery slope, because democracy is never to be taken for granted. It coexists, as Boris Falikov said, with residual of a pre-democratic situation, and can easily slip into a post-democratic situation. So that's why we will continue with these webinars until the Tai Ji Men case is solved. They are not repetitious, there are always new angles and new international scholars paying attention to the case. And so I hope the audience will be patient with us and follow. And so I want to thank the audience as well, and stay tuned. There will be other seminars on other angles of this important issue. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.